Well, everyone, it's time for us to go and take a look at the Google Pixel 2 XL and see if this particular phone is still worth buying in 2024. Now, the thing I would definitely tell you about this particular phone is that one, it's a beautiful device. I'm surprised that, Google was able to make this phone back then when this phone first came out, because in 2017, there were a lot of phones coming around, but this phone on the front doesn't even look that much like a 2017 phone. It looks like a fairly modern phone, for the most part. Now, it doesn't feel like the best phone anymore, and obviously it doesn't perform the best, but I do think this was the prime of the Google Pixels for a couple of years, until about the Pixel 6 came out, to be honest. So if you want to pick up some Google Pixels or some phones that I recommend buying this year, links will be down in the description. You can get that from there, and you can help support the channel at the same time. Now, starting off with the outside of the Pixel 2 XL, in this particular phone on the front, it was a very good looking phone. It had a 6-inch P OLED display. Now, this was a 1440p display. It was very big at the time. Again, this was the XL model, and it looked so beautiful. I love the fact that this phone looked this great because you are easily able to go and just use this phone on an everyday basis, have a very big panel, very thin bezels, and coming from the original Google Pixel XL, this phone looked 10,000 times better than that particular phone. The Pixel XL, not the Pixel XL. The Pixel XL, the original one, had this massive amount of bezel on it. It made no sense why it had that big amount of bezel. The Pixel 2 XL had a sway, less than half the amount of bezel, but it was also giving you front-facing speakers, which was a very, very cool thing that particular phone was giving you. Now, on top of that, this particular phone was also giving you just a really good display, which was nice. On the bottom, USB Type-C port, which is very good. You're also getting your flat sides all across this thing, which, was still very nice to have. In 2017, there were maybe some phones that were giving you expandable storage, like on the Samsung side and whatnot. But for the most part, even then, it wasn't really the craziest big of a deal. But I will tell you, a really cool thing that the Google Pixel kind of stood out for was that it was giving you a very good looking phone. The Galaxy S8 also came out this particular year. And the cool thing is that this phone didn't look that much worse than the Galaxy S8 Plus, which was its main direct competitor, I would say. But it looked definitely better than the iPhone 8 Plus that came out kind of right before this thing. But this thing looked very beautiful, which is really nice. On the back side, you were also getting this kind of, aluminum back. It had a little bit of glass at the very top, but it was mostly aluminum. And it still looks and feels pretty good. This is another cool thing going on for this particular phone too, is that it does pretty much look very nice. It's, a single camera setup, which at that time wasn't super crazy. The other devices were kind of giving you maybe a little bit more of a better camera setup when it kind of came down to it. But even then, it wasn't the biggest deal in the world. You're still getting a very good looking, phone from this thing without a doubt from that particular perspective. So I'm trying to think what else is there to kind of hit on with this particular phone. You were getting IP certification. You were getting, a lot of things that a lot of phones have nowadays, but some things that you're missing on this device that other phones maybe were giving you around that time, things like wireless charging. This phone was kind of missing it there. Curved displays was a pretty big thing. This did not have a curved display at that time. Beyond that though, this phone kind of was about the same thing as every other phone at that time. It just looked very good, and it was stock Android. Now, in terms of the camera side of things, this particular phone was giving you a single 12.2 megapixel wide-angle camera on the front, on the back, and an 8 megapixel wide-angle camera on the front. Now, the thing you have to remember about this particular phone, and phones around that time, most phones were kind of able to give you 4K at 60 on the back, and most of them were doing 1080p on the front. This one, the front camera was pretty good, but the back one was still giving you 4K at 30. By this time, a majority of phones were already able to give you 4K at 60, and I do think this was kind of an interesting thing going on here, because when looking at this particular device, you would think that this particular phone would be able to do 4K at 60 on the back, considering that Google was known at this time of having one of the better cameras. Unfortunately, this era of Google was very weird because this was probably the last Pixel a lot of people looked at as having a very solid camera. After this, most people pretty much have moved on from this type of, the Google being the best camera after the Pixel 1 and Pixel 2. After that, a majority of people went ahead and just bought the Pixel, the Samsung Galaxies or the iPhones of those years if they wanted the better devices. So this one, unfortunately, you were getting a good camera without a doubt, but it really wasn't that great compared to the competition really. So that was kind of an unfortunate thing, I would say, kind of going on for this particular phone, because with this device, although it was a good phone, the camera really wasn't that great, and compared to the direct competitors of this particular device, I feel like Google could have done a little bit of a better job. So I will tell you, in a lot of ways, I like this phone, but the camera just really wasn't that great. It still isn't really doing that great anymore, to be completely honest, but I do think it was a good phone. It held up, well throughout the last couple of years. And I like the Pixel 2 XL from that standpoint. But beyond that, it really wasn't worth it, if I'm being honest, because, the competition was doing a much, much better job. So that right there kind of covers it up from the camera side of things. Now, in terms of the software, this was a very interesting thing because Google, as we all know, does a really, really good job with their software, and that is something that is really nice going on. I like stock Android. I think stock Android is very solid, and with this type of device, it was giving you a stock Android experience. So that is something that I actually liked a lot. If I was going through and if I was buying some sort of a phone, like I did want it to be stock Android at that time because I knew it was either going to be supported for a while or it was basically going to give me a pretty solid experience. And this device was basically giving me that, which was very, very cool. And with the Google Pixel 2 XL this time, not only was it supported, for quite a few years, it started off at Android 8.0. It went all the way up to Android 11, which was very, very cool. And this in and of itself was another super cool thing going on. And I will tell you in a lot of different ways, this was a very good phone from that particular perspective, which again is another super important thing to keep in mind. When I look at this particular device though, I look at a phone like this and I do think like, hey, this phone, from a software perspective is still very, very good, which is really nice to see. Now on top of that, with the Google Pixel 2 XL, this particular phone performance-wise was giving you that Snapdragon 835 chipset inside, which was the best chipset of that time, and it was giving you 4 gigabytes of RAM. The thing you have to remember about this particular phone is that from a performance perspective, this was giving you basically, like I said before, the top of the top at that time, which I think was genuinely very nice. Like if I'm going through and getting some sort of a phone that's, trying to get the best type of performance or whatever, this phone is doing a really good job, I would say, from a performance perspective because it was giving you the best performance you could probably get at that time. So you have to remember a few things. One, this phone, top of the time, 4 gigabytes of RAM I think was still very decent at that moment, which I think was very respectable, something I liked a lot. The thing that you also have to remember is that it was stock Android. So it was giving you stock Android, it was giving you a lot of things across the board that way. So I will tell you from that side, I think the performance of this phone is still fairly decent. It's not perfect by any means, but I think it's a good performing phone at that time. But keep in mind, now it's a little bit of a different story. This is not necessarily the best performing phone of this time anymore, but not most phones from 2017, I could say the same thing about those two. So that's another fairly big thing to kind of keep in mind. And the thing I'll tell you about the Google Pixel 2 XL is that in a lot of different ways, this particular phone, it was a very interesting device. It was an interesting device when it first came out, and it still is kind of an interesting, phone. I look at a phone like this phone and I'm like, hey, it's a great phone. When it first came out, I just don't really think it's worth buying anymore. And that's just kind of what happens when you have a phone that's completely outdated. But it's not because this phone is bad. This was a really good phone. It had a couple issues, but the main problem is that it's just not supported. It hasn't been supported for a couple of years. So some phones I would recommend buying, or if I were you, I'd recommend buying, are phones like the Google Pixel 6 or above. The 5 also works, but the 6 or above, the Samsung Galaxy S21 or above, or an iPhone 10 or 10s, 10s Max or above. Those are the phones I'd probably recommend a vast majority of people to buy. This one, is good and everything, but it's just not really worth buying unless you're going to even custom ROM it, and even then I wouldn't recommend buying. So in terms of that kind of covers it up there. If you have any other thoughts or questions, please let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.